So Congressman Gohmert needs very little introduction. I did want to make mention, though, that surprisingly he continued to hold a new chairman position. So he is the new chairman of the Natural Resource Oversight Committee and continues to also serve on other committees as well. And he's been referred to as the conscience of the Republican Party. So with that, let's welcome Congressman Louie Gohmert.
Thank you. Wow. This is a little warmer reception than I got on the floor of the House. But anyway, it's great to be here. And, just a little background how that all happened. 2 years ago, led by, it wasn't me. I mean, I had stood up in our conference in November 2 years ago and nominated Newt Gingrich, even though I knew he didn't have a second. But I thought, at least this will give me a chance to use 3.5 minutes to explain failed leadership going back to January of 2006, when we first elected our current speaker as our leader. And so I did that, and then some of the guys that were elected in the class of November 2010 said, hey, we've got a group of us that are going to vote for somebody besides our current speaker in January. What is your intent? And I said, well, whether you do or not, I can't vote for him. So anyway, it went along, and we kept running into a problem because people would say, look, I'm in a tough district. I need the money that he can raise for me. And if I make him mad, I don't get the committee that I want, or have no chance at a chairmanship. So unless there's an announced candidate, then I can't vote for anybody but the current speaker. And that's what we kept running into. Well, we thought that after the problems we'd run into the last 2 years, that it might be that we'd have a lot more folks on board this time. But as some of us talked to different members about trying to elect somebody else, we kept running into that same problem. And Thomas Massey said it's like this: members know that their constituents don't want them voting for the current speaker, but 2 years ago they were able to say, gee, I would have voted for somebody else, but there was no announced candidate. And so, if there's no announced candidate, why throw my vote away? And that way they get to vote for the current speaker, and they get to have an excuse to tell their constituents. So Thomas Massey and Jim Bridenstine called Friday night for the election, and they said, it's not working again. People are using the same excuse that nobody has announced. And Thomas Massey said, yeah, and Jim Bridenstine had a brilliant idea. And Jim said, well, I want to hear that again. A guy from MIT saying that a guy from Oklahoma had a brilliant idea. But anyway, Thomas said, we need you to announce that you are a candidate. And I said, guys, do you not understand what will happen if I did that? The election would not be about failed leadership. It would be about this crazy guy from Texas. And, not only would the establishment all come after me and make the race all about me, they would have behind the scenes probably a lot of help from President Obama and his minions, just like he did to get the omnibus passed. And they said, yeah, but you're the only one that could go out and get enough publicity to make it into a real race. And I said, well, we got a conference call in the morning with some of the other guys. Let me think about it. And, I do pray about big decisions. And the next morning, other guys were saying the same thing. That's a great idea. And I said, guys, then it becomes about me instead of being about problems with leadership, and that fails. That doesn't work. And there was a continued push, and I said, I tell you what, if someone else were to announce before I did, then that makes it clear it's not about me, it's not about the person who announces today, Saturday, or somebody announces later. It's about the current leadership. I knew if I announced that it would ensure that I would not be elected speaker because it would make so many people in the House upset. But Ted Yoho said, well, I'll announce today if that'll get you to announce tomorrow. And I said, well, if he said, you know, not enough people know him. I think more people know Ted Yoho now, don't y'all? Yeah, he's a good man. And as a veterinarian, he's worked with both ends of the horse before. He understands, you know, how to work in Washington. He's got that experience. So anyway, and we had heard that Dan Webster would probably announce on Monday, and it ended up being Tuesday morning. But Ted announced on Saturday, and we called Fox News, and they said, sure, come on. And then that started it. But I felt a little like, well, I'll just give you this example. There was a guy that had bred the meanest, biggest, ferocious dog anybody'd ever heard of, anybody'd ever seen. And he just had an ongoing challenge. Anybody want to challenge my dog, put up $1,000 and you'll get 10 if your dog wins. And so he just knew nobody could beat his dog. Well, and he let him run around in the front yard. One day a little old lady came up to the door, knocked, and he opened the door and he said, where'd you come from? He said, well, I just came across your yard. And she said, I'm so sorry to tell you, but I think my dog killed your dog. And he said, that's impossible. And she said, no, I'm sorry, but it happened. He said, what kind of dog have you got? And she said, a Pekingese. And he said, there is no way in the world a Pekingese killed my dog. And she said, well, I'm really sorry, but it happened. And he said, well, how could your dog have killed my dog? And she said, he got stuck in his throat. So, you know, sometimes you have to have that sacrifice, you know, to take out the big dog. I mean, you know. So I was going to be the Pekingese, and but it was an amazing weekend, and I had one member tell me that she said, we have made sure, but every one of the calls we've gotten were from constituents, my actual constituents. And this member said, we've had over 1,000, and every single one of them asked me to vote for you for speaker. And I said, wow. And this member said, yeah, and not a single one asked me to vote for Boehner. Wow. And I said, so what are you going to do? She said, oh, well, I got to vote for Boehner, but I just thought you'd like to know. And I had others who had said they were going to vote for somebody besides the current speaker tell me, I've really been praying about this. I'm just not sure what to do. I've really been praying. And about midnight that night after the election, I mean, I believe in the power of prayer, but I was thinking, wait a minute, I wonder what that prayer sounded like. Oh, Lord, give me wisdom. Should I be an honest, honorable man of integrity who keeps his word? Or, I mean, what does that prayer sound like? You know, I don't know why you have to pray that prayer. But anyway, but I want to encourage you. Last July, we had been told for a year and a half or so we were going to have to pass some kind of immigration bill, and it sounded like it was going to be an amnesty bill to satisfy some of the national chambers. My local chambers don't feel this way, but the national chamber kept pushing and giving lots and lots of money because we need an amnesty bill. And anyway, the speaker had appointed a number of people to be on a working group to come up with principles for a good border bill. And they did, and they were good principles, and we unanimously agreed on all the principles. But that's not a bill. And based on nothing more than the principles, we were told, okay, we're going to have a bill come out on Tuesday, the last week of July, and we're going to vote on Thursday. And there were people pledging right and left. I'm voting for the bill. I'm voting for the bill. And there were even jeers when some of us would say, I really kind of need to read that bill, you know. I'm really sorry, but I really need to read the bill before I make a commitment like that. And there were people upset that we were being sticks in the mud. You know, please, let me read the bill. Well, I got a chance to read it on Tuesday night, and I finished about 2 a.m. And when I read a bill, normally I have my highlighter with a big one. I've got a blue pen and a black pen, and I'm making notes in the margin. And so I was doing that with this bill, and I laid down for a few hours, got back up at 5, reread it, and it was as bad as I thought it was on first blush. And so then that morning I had a meeting with Steve King and Michelle Bachman. I was showing them problems with the bill that I'd found. And they said, can we have a copy of your notes? I mean, a colored copy? I said, well, sure. So gave them a copy. And then we're meeting with other members, showing them these dramatic problems. I mean, the first one that really hit me was our principal said, if you don't show up for a hearing, you've got to be deported. No ifs, ands, or buts. You're just going to be deported. Because we had understood over 90% don't even show up for their deportation hearing. Any immigration hearing, they just 90% don't show up. And so that was a principle. Well, when I read the bill, it was at the bottom of page 18, it said that if someone failed to appear for their immigration hearing, the immigration judge shall, and it used the word shall, immediately order their deportation. But then there was this troubling 2-letter word, if. And you had to flip over the top of page 19 to see what the if was. And at the top of 19, it said, if the government can prove that the immigrant was at fault for failing to appear for the hearing. Well, now, I was a district judge, and if you didn't show up for a hearing, government didn't have to prove anything. I issued a warrant for your arrest. And for the immigration judge to have to wait for the government to send out an investigating team to figure out why you didn't show up for, I mean, that was a de facto amnesty provision right there. And it went like that throughout the bill. And there was a provision we'd all agreed on that the National Guard, if called upon by governors, should be reimbursed by federal funds. And we all agreed on that. And I didn't realize at first reading, but later, that the provision that was cited saying they had to be reimbursed required the Secretary of Defense to approve it, which meant they're never going to get reimbursed. I mean, they're really clever things like that. And we never did find out who wrote that bill. It wasn't Immigration Subcommittee, Judiciary Committee, it wasn't any of those. We don't know. The Speaker knows. But anyway, they had the votes to pass the bill Wednesday afternoon. But because the switchboard in Washington lit up and people were getting overwhelmed with calls, don't vote for this bill. Oh, yeah, the other thing, it was about noon. I thought, well, it's too late to send this to Rush. Sean doesn't have time to look at it before he goes on. Mark. So I emailed it. I emailed a PDF copy to Mark so he could see all. And I immediately get back an email from Mark saying, I ain't got time to read this bill before the show, Louie. And then about 10 minutes later, I see your notes. Oh, this will be great. Yeah, I can do this. So he went on, and he was and he's such a brilliant lawyer. And so he's such a quick study. He's going through explaining the provisions that made it a really bad bill and how duplicitous it was. And so anyway, you call Numbers USA, Tea Party Patriots, people were calling from around the country, and you changed the bill. It went from passing by Thursday morning. They didn't have the votes to pass it. That was you. That was you. You're clapping, but it was you. So, an amazing thing, the Speaker felt like, well, we're not going to be able to pass this bill before the August recess, So I guess there's nothing to do. But then a whole huge group of our conference said, wait a minute. Look, we agree on the principles. Let's get people in a room that understand this bill and what needs to be done and get a bill we can vote for before we leave. And that's exactly what happened. We spent 2 or 3 hours, about 12, 15 of us in a room Thursday night. We took out a whole bunch of the pages, changed some, substitute some of John Carter's language for another. And we ended up by Friday night, there was a couple of things I was promised and by mistake were left out, but overall it was a good bill. And you did that. And it made a difference. And I don't know if you heard, but many members around the country during August recess, by the way, don't be criticizing August recess. September is the best month in Congress because people have had a month to get an earful back home. Don't be condemning August. People have to go home. They can't say, I didn't have time to go home this week. You had a month, and when they go home, they get an earful, and September is a really good month, okay? So don't be complaining about that. Anyway, all through the fall, people were saying what we did that last week, that Thursday and Friday, should be a blueprint for what we do from now on, where we all get to have input in the bill. We've said that over and over. And before the election in November, people said that. And after the election in November, people said, that's a blueprint. We need to have input. We need to know what's going to be in the bill. We need to be able to fix it. And we don't need to have it written in some back room. And everybody got the message, nearly. And then out comes this omnibus bill. Now, just in a nutshell, we passed a decent border bill, but we had to go through the same process again. They were about to shove a bad bill down our throats. You responded. They realized that isn't going to work. And so they worked with, some people call them conservatives. I say it's mainstream. But we all worked together and we got a decent bill that we passed. You were so important in making that happen. And now the Senate takes it up. They may change it. And the president said if it comes like it is from the House, then he'll veto it. And if that happens, then we'll have a vote to override the veto. And I want you to remember the 90s. Even though President Clinton brags about welfare reform and how much that actually did for people, he vetoed it twice. And there were a couple of shutdowns in the interim. People don't like to remember that, but there were a couple of shutdowns. He vetoed it twice. And then by doing that and continuing to fight and bring it up to a vote, the votes built to the point they had enough to override the veto the third time if he had done it. So he signed it, and now it's one of the things he's proudest of. Sometimes you have to fight like that to get what's good for America. But so the trouble is, what's left is the only thing we didn't fund for the year was Homeland Security. That makes it tough. I mean, how does that I've negotiated some huge deals over the years before I went to the bench as a judge and Chief Justice, and I'm not sure how that negotiation works. All right, Mr. President, if you don't sign our bill that eliminates your amnesty, we're not going to fund the Border Patrol. Really? That's the best you got? So wait a minute, let me get this right. If I don't sign the bill defunding my amnesty, then you're going to leave the border wide open? That's your threat? Okay, and this while Paris and all the terrorist activities going on, and you guys are going to let me blame you for leaving the country wide open. Oh, okay. So we didn't leave ourselves a lot of leverage there. But let me just plant one seed that I planted at our conference Thursday. So what do we do if he vetoes the bill, and if we were not able to override the veto, then maybe we're stuck giving him money for Homeland Security. But I would submit a piece of leverage to say, but if by this date an objective determination is that the border's not secured, we're taking a huge, massive hunk of that money and block granting it to the states and local governments so they can. Yeah. Anyway, you got to think outside the box. But, well, let me just point out, as you know, and as my dear friend Jeff Duncan pointed out, and I'm so proud of Jeff. I mean, he came up there to Washington with clarity, and he still got it. Isn't that awesome? Oh, and by the way, when people said, well, look, I didn't vote against the speaker because that had no chance. Well, if about a third of those who said it had no chance had voted for it, we would have been way over. And the clue, the best clue, one of the speaker's best friends, biggest supporters, said on Monday before the vote on Tuesday, and I know he was trying to back up the speaker, he said, look, people need to know that we have 130 rock-solid votes for the speaker, so this movement has no chance. And I know he meant, okay, if we get to conference, we got 130, so he wins. But I'm thinking, you only got 130 rock-solid out of 246, really? And we only need 29? Tells you there were a lot of people that were trying to decide which way to go. And there were a number of people that said if there are this many votes, certain number of votes, by the time it gets to my letter that my last name begins with, I'll vote with you. But I'm not throwing away my chairmanship for a failed effort. And it was so close. It could have just as easily been 50 as it was 24. But anyway, our country is not respected around the world. And our allies, unfortunately, our allies are the ones who are afraid of us abandoning them. And I'm not just saying this, I'm repeating what I've heard in the Middle East from Muslim leaders of countries that say, we're worried we may be the next one your guys throw away. And our enemies obviously don't fear us. And so it's clear that we don't have a president that's going to be respected around the world and is going to be feared around the world. So that's up to Congress now to stand firm, force the president into a position where our country will be respected. And you've already seen the blueprint. We saw it in July. We've seen it again in November. We've seen it again this month. You know what you got to do. And it isn't stay at home. And the fact that you're here means you're one of the people willing to make those calls, do what you have to do. But you got to get your friends to do the same thing. This needs to be the nucleus that gets more and it expands and goes and goes. It's only the country at stake. It's not that big a deal. But you know, but you are the key. And for MSNBC and others, that's sarcasm, okay? All right. Probably be a headline. Gohmert says the country's no big deal. But and for those who believe in the power of prayer, you pray while you're working. You pray while you're working. Because finish with the words of Ben Franklin in 1787. We know they were his words because he wrote them out in his own handwriting after he had given them and people were asking for exactly what he said. He said, I have lived so a long time. And the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth. God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it possible an empire could rise without his aid? We've been assured, sir, in the sacred writing that unless the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. He said, I firmly believe this. I also firmly believe without his concurring aid, we will succeed in our political building no better than the builders of Babel. And we ourselves shall become a byword down through the ages. Folks, God's given us choices. And we have the freedom to choose to save this country or to let it continue down this road to the dustbin of history. I am so grateful I'm among people who care and want to get this country back on track. God bless you. Thanks for letting me be here.